The two hottest things right now in payments are agentic commerce and stablecoins. And we've got a guest who sits at the intersection of the two. So tell me, what's going on with stablecoins and agentic payment?
Oh man, what's not going on? I feel like the last time I was talking to someone about this recently, like the last time we had a new financial rail was probably credit cards in the 70s. And so it's probably the most exciting time in many of our, if not most of our careers, to be building in either fintech or crypto. And it's just been very exciting to see kind of with this new rail, how the markets are evolving around it, like how the different infrastructure players are adapting to serve this new market. It's just an incredibly exciting time.
Yeah, stablecoins have gone through this strong renaissance. Some time at a company that was, it was a fintech company, it was global, it needed to get payments from everywhere in the world. And they would have loved to take stablecoins, but then, this is after FTX collapsed. It was a big no-no. You can't take stablecoins. Banks won't bank you if you touch anything that touches stablecoins. And since then, the world has changed completely. I'm being offered bank accounts where I can onboard it with stablecoins. The whole world has changed tremendously. And yeah, you're right. Like it's a super exciting time for stablecoins. How are you seeing this development? What is that like from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I can just start with a very quick background on what we're building at Para.
Yeah.
So we offer wallet as a service infrastructure, basically making it really easy to provision wallets for any kind of on-chain transaction, whether that's identity related, payments related, credential, agentic commerce, you name it. And I can get into kind of why wallets are sort of the least interesting but most interesting, depending on who you talk to, element of the infra side here. But what we're seeing is just that, one, the regulatory environment has never been more favorable in terms of launching a stablecoin program. And so organizations that were kind of more hesitant or maybe had more on the compliance side that would have been blockers to launching a program are just seeing that that's easier to do than ever. And then I think with agentic commerce as well, it's really just there's this extremely large green field, and people understand that like many of the transactions that happen on the internet in the future will happen by agents. I think OpenAI, like ChatGPT ads, is probably one of the most interesting examples of this, where you can launch an LLM ad program and it's going to be just incredibly high in demand. But what we're seeing is really that there are all of these new kind of rails that are now serving existing payments volumes, where up until now, most of the people using crypto were trying to create net new payment flows. So this might be through something like NFT marketplaces or through something like a meme coin launchpad, where there was this maybe inherent demand that got created, but it wasn't that a payment flow that already existed. With stablecoins, what's really different is that these are payment flows that exist in the fiat world that are now getting moved onto a different rail. And I think agentic commerce has kind of a similar mechanism, where these are purchases that were anyways going to happen that are now happening via a different party.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. One of the things that you mentioned was the agentic checkout. That has had a setback recently through, news came out, Walmart mentioned that they weren't quite seeing the results that they were hoping to see there. And I get the intuition that agentic payments are maybe not going to look like what many people first thought that they would look like. Do you have any insight on this? Like, what do you think we have now, and where do you think we're going to end up?
Yeah, great question. I think what we've seen already is this kind of race to own the rails. And this race to own the rails has like very much outpaced the actual volume flowing through these rails. Like everyone has launched a standard, right? Like Stripe has MPP, Visa has TAP, there's X402 as well. Like there's all of this kind of movement towards like, let's build the rails for agents, but like where is the agent volume? My personal view on this is that agents are like fundamentally about outsourcing a purchase. And anyone who has ever outsourced a purchase knows that this comes with trade-offs. So like maybe all the way from asking your mom to buy you some clothes when she's at the mall, to asking someone to book travel for you. People do have like preferences, and when you insert even another person in the middle of that, you're always going to get some kind of difference in the outcome. And so at least my view is that agentic payments, right now there's this exuberance. I think there's a certain category of transactions that are going to be a really good fit. Procurement is an example, commodities purchases are another, but not everything is going to go through agentic commerce, and certainly not agentic decision making. So even if you have an LLM present you with 5 options, picking that actual option and converting, I think is largely going to be a human task for a lot of things, and can kind of go into at least my theories on like what is going to...
Okay, no, I'm interested in hearing this. Yeah, okay, so like people don't actually want to delegate that much of their purchase. I tend to agree with this. Like, a lot of people, not me personally, but I know a lot of people find it fun to buy stuff and to browse, and shopping is an activity that most people do for pleasure, right? So why would you want to outsource that? Okay, I understand. So what does it look like then?
Yeah, I think that the types of purchases that are going to be the first are things like laundry detergent. Let's say I want to switch laundry detergent and I'm trying to optimize in some set of criteria. Let's say like a toothbrush is like another example. Like these are things that I just want the product. And like the actual like act of making this decision there's a little bit less personal. Things that are maybe more personal are like watches, handbags, like luxury goods, like clothing. Like these are all kind of purchases where people tend to like express a part of themselves in that actual purchase. I think those are going to be, LLMs will probably help in discovery and curation, but actual conversion is going to be largely human-led. I think software, this is really interesting. Like kind of with Para, actually, we've started to see the first set of customers that will build products with Para and launch and have never interacted with any of us or our product, or in some cases, like we have some automation that reaches out to people that go live, and they aren't really aware that their LLM decided to use Para wallets in their product. And so
they don't even know. Okay, it's interesting.
And so software is, I think, a really interesting case here where a lot of infrastructure decisions are getting made by LLMs. And this is especially true in LLM developed software, where maybe sometimes people will tell their LLM, like, use XYZ stack to build a vibe coded recipe blog. But in many cases, they're more focused on what the feature set is. And the LLM is actually the one making the decision around which infrastructure to use. So like that's really, I think, an early case where building for LLMs, and we already see like some of our most trafficked websites are the ones that LLMs are accessing.
Okay, I have a ton of questions here. First of all, two questions, and you can answer them how you can. First question is, how do you market to LLMs, right? Because I spend a good part of my day vibe coding, and I'm using, frankly, Resend because my LLM told me to use Resend. And I'm using Cloudflare RDS because, whatever, that's what Claude told me to. So one question for you is do you guys work on anything so that you get promoted instead of the competition? And the other question is a little bit around the business model, right? Because if I tomorrow decided to launch a wallet, how does it work? Because fundamentally, a wallet is just it's at its core, just a nice password manager, right? I mean, there's a lot more to this, and the security component of it is super important. But fundamentally, how do you guys charge the app developer? Do you charge them per user, per transaction? Is there some flows that you monitor? Just give me an understanding of how this works.
Yeah, great. This is a great question. Para as a product, we tend to charge on a usage-based scenario. So this is based on the number of users or the number of wallets, really depending on the mode that someone is integrating with. To first answer your question of how to sell to LLMs, I'm sure there are people who are much smarter than me who are writing the books on this. But largely, I think LLMs care about ease of use. They care about easy to understand documentation. They care about having open referenceable examples, and then they care about contextually relevant information. And so I think the way to best position your product for an LLM is to make it easy for the LLM to use. And a lot of how we think about this at Para is it boils down to one, making as much accessible via CLI as possible when it comes to the act of configuring software. So, and maybe to note, like Para we're not a mobile wallet that you download as an app, but we're a developer SDK.
Provider. Yes.
So a lot of software has historically worked with you download an NPM package, you kind of integrate the product, but then you also have a web app. And that web app is where you do things like billing, configuration, like environment management, security configs, like things like that. We recently took all of that and made it a CLI. And what that does is it makes it so that an LLM doesn't need to be interacting with configs at a web page level. They can interact with it at a code level. Yeah. And that is kind of a big one where we're seeing this very common paradigm now of you have a window that opens up, you authenticate into that window, but then very quickly you hop back into code and interacting via a terminal. So that's kind of been a big focus for us is like, how do you optimize a terminal home or terminal-based development workflow? That's big. And then, I mean, the second is also just like making as many things defaults as possible. So limiting the amount of like human configs and like human checklists that need to be completed. So at this point in time, the only actions that you need to take as a human to install Para are to one, authenticate into that developer portal, and I guess maybe if you're using OpenClaw could do it, and then filling out billing. And that's really it. And then in the future, we're trying to even limit that and reduce that second step further so that it can be done by agents as well.
Okay. And how do you guys charge for this, right? Because this isn't free. You need to put a lot of work into this. Like how do I, if I were to launch a wallet app tomorrow, how would that work?
Yeah, so I mean, wallet as a service, so we bill on a usage-based criteria. So we take the number of users that have been created, the number of wallets that have been created, the number of transactions that have been signed, and that is the basis on which we bill. So if you're using our APIs, our REST APIs, it's on an API usage basis. If it's our like modal components in our authentication product, then it's on a per usage.
Okay, got it. Whoever's listening to this or reading the article is thinking about, okay, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I can get Claude to build a mobile wallet for me tomorrow. You guys are at a very important level of the stack, but like people still need to publish this on the App Store. They need to meet all App Store restrictions. There's all sorts of other features that they need to do. What have you seen here? Like, because like AI has opened up the playing field, but I wonder like whether people are still getting stuck somewhere, or what sort of new innovations have come online.
I mean, one of the biggest things we've seen is anyone who's been a developer knows that sometimes managing your development environment, and for something like a native mobile app, sometimes it can be a lot harder than it is in web programming. So we've just seen a lot of advances in terms of being able to use LLMs to kind of manage development environments and to streamline those. I mean, I'm thinking back to my mobile engineering days and like having kind of local state that's out of sync or somehow corrupted. Yeah. You're spending a lot of time on these like unplug it and plug it back in type of actions. I think a lot of that has been largely automated and can now be kind of assisted, so you're not doing as much of it manually. Other steps, I think certainly App Store review, our sense is that it's similar to what the process has been before. I'm sure on the back end, there's probably gains that have been made.
Right, but I mean more like are vibe coders getting tripped up on the App Store review? Is that, or would you even notice if they are, I guess? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't noticed anything along these lines. Like, if anything, it seemed like a fairly similar process to before. Yeah, it does kind of articulate an interesting point, right? Which is like what has gotten a lot easier and what is still just as difficult. I mean, what's gotten a lot easier is having something that you can put in a test flight. The hardest thing is still distribution. And like certainly like at every step of the way, like that's where this is going to be tricky. Security, I think, is also something that has only gotten harder with the advent of LLMs, where now you need to reason about code, and there's so many layers to this, but you now need to reason about code that was auto-generated. Security in terms of, like, our product is fundamentally a security product. And so for us, that means that there are like certain elements of our own internal code bases where we don't use LLMs. And you need to kind of accept that there are like different sort of layers of importance to different levels of code. Like there's some code that is intended to have a very long lifetime, and some code that is intended to have very short lifetime. The very short lifetime code, the sky's the limit in terms of speed. But that super hard and like super security oriented infrastructure is, I mean, ultimately one of the hardest things to crack with it.
Have you seen an influx of new clients coming in to sign up because they've vibe coded something or they've shipped something faster? Has this been a noticeable trend?
Yes, absolutely. We've had several teams that have now, they've gone live, like we've never spoken to them. That's been the case for some time, but even more so, there have been teams that don't even really know that they didn't really choose a wallet provider to use. This was just what was put in the product by their LLM. So that has, I think, been the most stark thing lately.
That's fascinating. Cool. All right. So on the agentic side, I guess there's two aspects of it. Like one of it is like, agentic commerce in the sense of the agent is building the app. But there's also the sense of agents interacting with your wallet, right? With the keys that you provision for them and them interacting with the rest of the world in this respect. What have you seen there? I know you mentioned that as of right now, the agent can't yet pay for the service themselves, but maybe you're working on that.
Yeah, I mean, many of our customers, so when I say can't pay for the service, I mean like our particular software cannot be, like we do have a web page, and so you do need some web page aware.
But you can't do it via the CLI, right?
Yeah, the payment is not possible via CLI. Maybe some changes to that soon. But what we are seeing is a lot of development around agent toolkits. So we had an agent toolkit recently launched that lets you do everything from, there are a few different teams I'll highlight here. There's a team called Colossus that lets you provision credit cards backed with stable coins with super granular permissions on them. So for example, I could create a stable coin backed card and give it $200 a week and just have it buy Chipotle. So it's only allowed to buy my Chipotle bowl every day.
For my Chipotle bot.
Exactly. So you can have Chipotle bot and give it a card. And then kind of all the way from that, we have another team called SBC. They had built an agent toolkit on Radius that allows you to do any kind of different transacting, build out DeFi strategies. I think the common theme in all of this is that people are starting to trust agents to make purchases, but there need to be guardrails. Like people are willing to give an agent something like a $200 limit a week for the Chipotle bowl, but people are not yet at the point where we're trusting agents with like full access to the bank account. And a lot of what's in this is we trust agents to optimize subject to certain criteria. And so where we've invested a lot in this is building tools to give guardrails to agents. Like wallets are ultimately the authorization and control flow layer of anything that's happening on chain. And so it really is on the wallet layer to also provide that access control of what types of transactions can this agent perform, what kind of transactions can be signed, spending limits, protocol restrictions, chain restrictions, things like that. And so we've kind of built out a big permissions framework to make it easier to kind of trust agents with these guardrails.
Got it. And how different was this from the infrastructure that you had before, right? Because before you're also looking at, basically provisioning wallets for end users in a way that's simple and easy to use with certain guardrails or maybe no guardrails, multi-party signatures, computation. Like, is this just, functionally just like creating another user type, or is this a little bit more of a lift in terms of thinking of the infrastructure and the architecture?
From the fundamental infrastructure perspective, the main difference is like the approver, if you will. So in a historic, like let's call it, I open up the ENS website and I'm going to buy an Ethereum, like an ENS name. What I would do as a user is I would see a bunch of information around what it's going to cost me, what I'm buying, and then I push a button. And that is effectively my authorization. What's shifting is that you may now have an agent performing that authorization. And as a result, you need some version of that sanity check of like, is the right thing happening? So what we've seen is like wallets have always been this control layer, but what's changing is like kind of at what layer the approvals happen. So before it was kind of upfront, do we allow this or not before the transaction's initiated? Now what we're seeing is the agent can initiate any transaction they want, but you have this permissions and policies layer that is deciding what ultimately gets through. In terms of the infrastructure change, like Para uses something called MPC, or multi-party computation, that's actually extremely well suited to this, because you actually have different signing shares that are all separately approving a transaction. And so you have multiple layers at which you can kind of add these authorization or approvals. And so for us, actually, permissions are like one of the very first kind of elements of kind of after basically just signing a transaction, what do you do next? So this is in the very earliest versions of the product. But I think with agents, we're just seeing that the use cases are so much higher because you do have this like untrusted party.
And how do you think about, so what I'm trying to understand is, on one hand, you have this traditional, or maybe not traditional, this crypto setup of like, okay, this is the party of whom I delegate the ability to do this. And on the other hand, you have all of these protocols coming up, X402 from Coinbase, Visa recently came out with something, there's a ton of these. Like, how do these worlds interact? Do they interact? What's like when you're thinking of provisioning a card for an agent that is controlled via an MPC wallet, like, are you thinking about a connection with some Visa SDK? Or are you thinking about, I'm going to plug in with a crypto card provider and I'm just going to, deposit this much in stable coins to the non-custodial thing that that card has access to? Like, there's so many ways of doing this. How are you guys thinking about it?
So we generally think about wallets we think that wallets are ultimately about its liquidity and access to that liquidity. So there is this model where you kind of create 100 different wallets. Each of them have like $1 in them. That's nice in some ways because you can never be compromised for more than $1 if somebody compromises one of your wallets. But it's not great because if you need to buy something that costs $5, you need to interact with 5 different wallets to actually make that happen. So we think about things more as keep that $100 in a wallet and permission access for different parties to that wallet. And so we kind of like to think about this as a combination of like liquidity access and ease of use, which ultimately is conversion along with permissions and access. We also do interact with all of these protocols and enable our customers to where it makes sense. We have full support for X402 and then several of the other like MPP, like many of these rails, you can already use them with Para wallets and we have people who do. We don't like to prescribe a particular agentic kind of standard. And that's mainly because we are still at a point where all of these standards are evolving and growing. And so forcing our customers into one standard might not always meet their needs.
You mentioned that there seems to be a rush to build out the infrastructure before the demand is truly there. Is there somewhere where you've seen signs of demand or something that you've been surprised by that you weren't quite expecting in this space?
Yeah, maybe with agentic payments and more with the stablecoin adoption itself. I think I've been really kind of fascinated by what the real world adoption has looked like, where a lot of it has actually been, I think people might have guessed that like the super like tech forward like fintechs would be kind of the first to fully move over to stablecoins, and many of them are adopting the tech, but I'm actually finding some of the more transformative use cases are companies that kind of operate completely outside tech in terms of their core user base. Like one example is there's a company called QualiPay that we work with that does humanitarian aid. And humanitarian aid used to consist of many different wire transfers, cash handouts at endpoints, and really just this kind of like super messy system. And I think this is where we're seeing there's like the most opportunity for something like a stablecoin based payment rail to like save time, save money, improve reliability. And this is not what you would have guessed would be the absolute first use case for something like stablecoins, but it is actually, there's like just very clear efficiency gains to be made. And so I am actually noticing that the adoption is almost like bimodal, where if you look at agentic payments in X402, there's a lot of people like building out applications, a lot of experiments. And then on the kind of existing flows moving through the stablecoin pipes, that's actually some of the older, more established kind of funds flows out there.
What's been the main source of demand, as far as you can tell, for stable coins? Is it these more established old school companies finally ramping up, or is it prediction markets? Is it on the remittance space? Where are you seeing growth?
Yeah. I mean, I think for that, it's worth taking a step back to just talking about why stablecoins are great. So historically, we've had really three different layers of the financial system. There's kind of the app or interface layer, there's the rails layer, and then there's the ledger. And these have all been pretty much fully aligned, where if you're using a single app interface, that is settling on the ledger that's owned by that app. And the rails that go between it, there's only so many different type of methods of payment that exist. What we're seeing now is that with blockchains, you have a completely unbundled system here where you can use any ledger, you can define your own rails via smart contracts, and you can access that underlying ledger from any application in a permissionless manner. And so because of that, it's what is the benefit of stablecoins? It is open, global, cheap value transfer. And so that's, I think, what directly ties into where we're seeing this first. It's, to your point, international organizations that do high volume of international payments, cross-border settlement on the B2B side, remittance on the peer-to-peer side. So examples of payments that would maybe take almost 4 business days to settle via wire because different countries have different banking days, all the way over to something like sending remittance back home. So those are the first use cases we're seeing. But I think beyond that, we're going to start to see more use cases where once people actually start to hold stablecoin balances, then you have really interesting use cases like what you described, where you can create a neobank account and fund it with stables. So wave one is really kind of the stablecoins as a transit method to get this really neat global activity. But then once people start to get more comfortable and hold stablecoin balances, then it becomes the entire world of financial services with stablecoins as a primitive.
Do you see anything in your data that would support this thesis that people are increasingly using stablecoins as a balance mechanism rather than as something to send here and there?
What we are seeing across, so specifically within the remittance category, what we have noticed is that remittance used to largely be the stablecoin sandwich behavior, where you have fiat on both sides and then you use stablecoins in the middle. What we're seeing is that cards and stablecoin-based cards have greatly accelerated how easy it is for a receiver of a remittance to hold a stablecoin balance. So what'll happen is, let's say I'm sending $25 to Argentina. The receiver in Argentina can have a virtual card that's attached to that $25 balance and then just spend directly on anything that they need to. Rampa is a customer of ours that's doing this in Latin America today. And what we're seeing is that customers are actually, and this is across different geographies, they're choosing to hold more in stablecoins because cash out fees are usually quite high. And they actually get access to more of their money if they're spending it directly via a crypto card. There's also things like access to RWAs, tokenized stocks, on-chain DeFi yields that are also serving as a really nice carrot to keep more of those balances in stables.
Got it. All right. And then what I want to understand a little bit is what are your views for what's left of the year? Where do you think this is heading? Because you mentioned we're going to see possibly the beginning of agentic commerce. We're going to see people holding stablecoin balances longer and longer. We also mentioned the trend of more and more vibe-coded wallet apps. What else do you expect to see this year?
I mean, I think we have this pretty incredible, almost circling all the way back to where we started here, where because there is this new financial rail, there's an incredible race shaping up right now around who is going to own this rail. And I think we've largely seen that play out at the chain level and kind of the issuance, stablecoin orchestration layer. And a lot of this has been kind of either acquisition or partnerships across Stripe, Visa, MasterCard. I think what we're going to continue to see is that sort of race to own the rails like take shape. But I actually think the next thing we're going to hear a lot more about is wallets, because in this whole stablecoin rails kind of setup and consolidation, if you will, I think what's been really interesting to observe is that there's a lot of talk around the rails and the ledger, but not as much around how that value actually moves. And wallets are actually the interface that controls a lot of that movement. And so I'm interested to kind of see how that shapes up. And especially in conjunction with clarity and everything evolving around whether that will. So that's personally what I'm most excited to see.
Of course. And working at a wallet company, you couldn't say anything else. I think wallets are very exciting, right? Because I still remember back in 2018 when the only wallet that really existed was MetaMask. Well, it's not true. There were other wallets, but MetaMask is the best one, and it was still very much supported by consensus. And there was this whole discussion around wallets being a terrible business because they don't generate any money and they require a lot of support, and you can't charge the user for anything. And obviously now wallets are immensely profitable, right? Because you have all these services on top of them, swaps, etc., etc. A lot of things that you can and should do with them that add value to the end user, but also generate fees for the wallet. So it's always very interesting for me to see the big evolution that this category has gone through.
Yeah, wallets, and this is, I kind of said this in a different way earlier, but I feel like wallets are always kind of taken at like exactly face value, when in the crypto world there's so much more than that, where like MetaMask is more than a mobile app. Like MetaMask is however many tens of millions of users, and that user's access point to any action on chain. Similarly, embedded wallets are this control and access layer. So it's like wallets are not just this transaction feed and a send flow. They're ultimately kind of the bottleneck, or like the waste of like the hourglass of everything that's happening outside of crypto. So this is like fiat into crypto, but also every chain, every DeFi primitive, every action that you can take on chain needs to go through a wallet. And I feel like people still don't fully get that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, every single time that someone makes some sort of, someone or their agent makes any sort of purchase or transaction, it has to go through some sort of wallet provider. And you guys are there at the very, very base. So that's why you have such interesting data and such interesting insight on the way things are going. Is there something that we haven't covered so far that you wanted to make sure we got to discuss? Thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.